Hello, all, and welcome to the Buried Tome. My name is John Aiden. In my last video, I left off at the interview portion of my life. Shortly after my baptism, I gave that interview, and the rest of my story going forward can be defined as me finding my place in the organization. Or, I should say, trying and unsuccessfully finding my place in the organization. I'm reminded of one of Brother Jeffrey Jackson's morning worship talks. And this particular one always stood out to me because I'd, had many of the things that he spoke of in that talk. It paved the way for me to look back on what was it? What was it that really stirred my heart to be so unsettled in my time in the organization? And I can pinpoint now these defining moments that on the surface I did not know they would be defining moments, but looking back, finding the thread, what was that thread to me? Is what I asked myself. Why did I feel so uneasy, or unsteady? Like I was still finding my place, but by this time I had so much exposure to the organization that my only answer was I was deficient, that I didn't study enough. My high school life, it could have gone so much differently because of the mentality I had when I was in high school. Of course, higher education, it's so frowned upon that without even needing to be directly told to my face, don't go to college, just hearing about it at the meetings was enough to instill that mentality within me that I'm not going to go to college. And I had I had no direction. Secularly, I had no direction. I just knew I wanted to pioneer. I knew I wanted to go to Bethel. I knew I wanted to do LDC and just busy myself within the organization because I thought if I did those things, I wouldn't need higher education. Though I was a good student. I was an A student on average in my high school days. I didn't even bother with college counselors and scholarships and things like that. Looking back, I am curious about those things, but that was just my mentality at the time. And so after high school, graduated high school, took on a job that would allow me to pioneer, and I tried pioneering, but it's funny because I did not like the ministry. I never liked the ministry, and I could just never find that joy that so many claimed to have found. This is the best life ever. I love pioneering. Those are the things that I would hear all the time. But I did it because I felt if I can get through this, if I can give myself enough exposure as a pioneer, then something is going to change inside of my heart. Something is going to click. The Holy Spirit is going to intervene and create a change in me so profound that I will be completely unrecognizable internally to myself. I would develop this insatiable desire to preach, but it never came. My heart just it was never in the pioneer work, and so I figured if I exposed myself to different forms of the ministry, that I could substitute the hours that I would be door to door, which was the least enjoyable aspect of the ministry to me. It just felt antiquated because there was so much exposure now and so much skepticism and caution. My own family doesn't answer the door when salesmen come up, and so why would householders even entertain uh anyone, especially those of a religious calling. But anyway, so I tried. But another way I substituted my pioneer hours was with SMPW, Special Metropolitan Public Witnessing. And I started that 2019, January 2019. I got into the SMPW work, and shortly afterward, I became a key man. I was responsible for bringing the carts and scheduling, creating a schedule for the volunteers that would be in my shift. And as a 19-year-old, I figured it was good for me to learn responsibility in this new way, and it did. It did. So again, being in the organization was not bad for me in every way because it taught me skills that I could take with me growing up. So I don't, again, I can't say that I regret my time in the organization because skills like this, scheduling others, basically being a team lead, among other things like giving talks, becoming a good speaker, public speaker, writing talks, obtaining, collecting, and disseminating information. All these things I learned while I was in the organization. But another thing that I learned was how to defend, or how to confront, I should say, apostates. You could call this a defining moment in my life because in my time doing SMPW, I had my first real encounter with apostates, door to door ministry in my local neighborhood. I never really encountered true, watchtower video apostates. And so when I finally did, I thought, man, this is exciting, because now I can see the kind of stuff that I am made of. And encountering these apostates, particularly one consistent apostate at this particular location that I was assigned to in the metropolitan work, there was an apostate that worked for the local courts. And so every day he would pass by, and on his way to the courthouse, he'd make a point to give us his feedback. But he was so bitter and angry. And I learned that he was never even a witness himself. And so his attitude only cemented the things that I knew about apostates, that they were only trying to get you to fall away. They were nothing good. They had nothing good to share, and they should be avoided at all costs, or if not avoided, just unengaged, or don't engage with them. Be better than apostates. And that was the only exposure I had to what I considered apostasy. Looking back, though, on the things that he said, I agree with him now. He talked about the blood issue a lot, children dying, but it was just his presentation of it that only cemented it. It made me more solid in my beliefs. I thought, yes, this is what being a witness is all about, the persecution that accompanies this lifestyle that Jesus said his followers would have. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you. And so that's the mentality that I had. And so I was going strong. I was going strong at this time. But because of this, I learned that I learned a fundamental truth. The reason why you become a witness in the first place is like an anchor point. And my anchor point was knowledge. It was truth. Emotional connection was secondary at best to my reason for being a witness, because I was able to defend my beliefs according to the knowledge I had. It was academic knowledge. Again, that was the basis for my loyalty. Even if I was willing to concede that the organization's reputation that these apostates were bringing against me, presenting to me in this very bitter way, even if I were willing to concede that what they were saying was true, I felt that I was doing what I needed to do, and that my knowledge was correct, and so everything else was really irrelevant to me. So, and of course, at this time, my dad was also sharing with me. He's the one that introduced me to the Australian Commission, Royal Commission regarding sexual abuse, and I ignored it because I said, even if it's true, not all witnesses are like that. There are bound to be bad witnesses. But what I really didn't understand was the organization's guilt in covering it up. That truly did not register with me. I thought these were just sporadic one-off instances. So I didn't have a full picture of what was actually going on at that time. So I was sheltered. I was sheltered by my own knowledge, by my own understanding that I was doing what I needed to do, and everything else was irrelevant. I do wonder though, if those apostates had targeted 1919, the year that the governing body was selected by Jesus Christ to be the faithful and discreet slave, if they'd asked me to define that belief, to break it down, I could not because I was only familiar with 1914. I knew the calculations, I knew how to get to that point. But why the faithful and discreet slave in 1919? Also, if they had asked me about 607 BCE, something I'd never heard of until recently, I'd never heard of it. The 586, 587 year, no one ever asked me about that. And those were the things that I based my beliefs on. So if they had just asked me those questions, I wonder if I may not have woken up sooner. But unfortunately, they did not. They were just very bitter. They were not logical in their presentation, not cold or calculating. It was very emotionally charged, and so I was easily able to deflect it with my emotional shields. And so that was SMPW. And that carried on that way for a few months. And so I just developed a resilience to anything apostates would say. Um, but as regards internally, or at least in the house, my dad would share things with me like the Australian Royal Commission. He taught me things about my own religion that I didn't know myself. Sometimes I would be forced to concede to their existence. Other times I just denied it. I denied it and said no, it's got to be fabricated. Like for example, one thing I did not believe was Beth Sarim and 1925. I just thought there is no way that it's real. That's ridiculous. That no one, no one could have believed that. I mean, why would you believe something like that? And I thought if it's in print, it's got to be doctored. There is no way it existed. One thing I was forced to acknowledge though was the mediator. Jesus is not my mediator. And so my dad, I remember one day he'd asked me, "Who's your mediator? Or is Jesus your mediator?" I said, "Of course he is." And he said, "No, no, it's not. No, he's not. He is the 144,000 mediator. He's not your mediator." And so he showed me from the watchtower, and I had to concede. I had to relent. I said, "Sure enough, he's my intercessor. He's not my mediator. It was around this time also that I was having doubts of my own. I never vocalized them to anyone for years, but it was nothing I could shake. And when I heard at conventions and assemblies and meetings to do your own research, to make the truth your own, I tried. But the more I tried to comprehend this particular troubling teaching, and it started with one, but it was a big one. And it was troubling to me because I knew what the Bible said about it. And that was the teaching of the anointed. I struggled year after year. Whenever the memorials would come around, it would revitalize these doubts that I was having, and I did not know how to put them to rest. In fact, the more I contemplated and researched, the more frustration and confusion I experienced. There's a particular passage of the Bible that stuck with me, and it comforted me during those times. For an abundance of wisdom brings an abundance of frustration, so that whoever increases knowledge increases pain. These words proved true to me year after year. In fact, the more I researched, again, I was just frustrated. I was frustrated by my research because the conclusion that the watchtowers had come to were so far out from the things that I was reading for myself and drawing conclusions for myself. It troubled me. And then I would see the reverence that ordinary sheep would pay to these anointed individuals, how they would speak highly of them just for the fact that they claim to be of a different class. As I was attempting to reconcile my um, doubts of the anointed teaching, it started to undermine other very important aspects of faith as a Jehovah's Witness. Because if you don't believe in the anointed, then you don't believe in the governing body. And if you don't believe in the governing body, you don't believe in this organization. So you might understand where my consternation came from and how profound it was during this time of life. And for a couple of years, as the memorials would roll around, that was another thing my mind immediately turned its attention toward. Because disbelief, which my doubts had become in the anointed, then got me wondering about those that partake. Those that partake at the memorial must only do so if they believe with all their heart that they have a feeling, that they've received the Holy Spirit, that they feel it in their hearts, and that Jehovah chose them to be among this numbered 144,000. I always thought that that was a silly, silly teaching. But I didn't immediately understand why. Just that it was very arbitrary, and the reasonings given for this divide among partakers at the memorial was overly complicated. And I wondered at how anyone that was not already a witness could come to accept this teaching. So year after year, we have a watchtower dedicated to the topic of the ransom and the memorial observation. When 2024's watchtower came around, I I'd resolved myself to fully understand why I must not partake. And so I took to the research, researching every scripture that is available on this topic of observing the memorial, observing the Lord's evening meal. And my research cemented the doubts that I was having into conviction. I was moved to partake in secret. So after the 2024 memorial, still serving as a ministerial servant, um, right after the ceremony, I went into the back room, the elders' room, where they'd kept the remaining supplies of the emblems. And we had this little sampling bottle of wine, and there was a bag of crackers. And so I just pocketed a little bottle of wine and a cracker. I left the hall as quickly as I could. I drove home, and this hall, being in the foreign language, was a bit of a drive away. And so after about 40 minutes, I finally made it home. And I parked out front of the lake of the community. And so I walked to the pier, and in the full face of the full moon, I said a little prayer. Prayed that my observation of this memorial in secret would be pleasing and acceptable to my God and Jesus Christ. And then I partook, said a prayer for both, meditated a little bit, and then I went home and pretended like nothing had happened. And I told no one. I wondered at what would happen next year, though. I didn't know what to do with myself. I was so alone in thinking what I was thinking, but I could not share my convictions with others because they just would not understand that I put the scriptures above anything the watchtowers would say. That is a foreign concept to any Jehovah's Witness, no matter how reasonable they may think they are, or how much of an independent thinker, yet their independent thinking aligns them with the watchtower. Even these would not understand. And so, fast forwarding a year, I I was in the dumps spiritually because I I felt so out of place in the organization. And the more I researched and came to independent conclusions, I just continued to drift away. My spirituality was drifting away because of my research. And the 2025 Watchtower discussion of the memorial came out. And there were 3 lines of reasoning regarding those that partake at the memorial. And I'd like to do a separate video on that. But to finish this little story, my research just put me over the edge. And I said to myself, I'm going to partake in public. Now, by this time, I joined a new congregation. But being in this new congregation where no one knew me afforded me the opportunity to partake in confidence in public. So I did. And then I just drifted away from the meetings after that. I had no idea what was going to come and how my fading away would be turned into an absolute stance against the organization. Until next time.